Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to this special episode of Keeping Water. Now, today I'm not going to be talking about ponds, water, fish, filters, sheds, or even the garden. Instead, I'm going to be talking about mental health. And the reason for that is today is Time to Talk Day. Time to Talk Day is an initiative set up by Mind, Rethink Mental Illness and supported by Co-op. And it's about creating conversations around mental health to both reduce stigma and to increase support from people who are experiencing mental health problems. Now, I know, because I spend quite a lot of time on YouTube and I read comment sections, that people don't like it when things like this are spoken about in channels that aren't necessarily about mental health or health in general. If it's on a video game channel or a cycling channel or a football channel or indeed a pond keeping channel. And I'm not sure why that is, but sometimes people get a little bit cross, but hey, that's the internet for you. I think it's really important though, and it's particularly important that we don't just put mental health in a box. It's not something to be only spoken about when we're talking about health or mental health in particular. It's something that needs to be generalised and normalised and spoken about everywhere. In the same way that someone might mention their physical health. Very often I'll watch a pond channel and someone will say they haven't got a lot done on the pond because they broke their arm, and nobody will criticise them for talking about it. And that's how we should think about mental health. It's not something different, it's not something other people get, it's something we all might get. And it's something we need to talk about more, because as Mind are trying to do and Rethink Mental Illness is trying to do, it reduces stigma, increases understanding and helps support. Now, I often feel a little bit guilty that I don't talk about mental health conditions more, and that's because I have my own mental health conditions, and also in my day job some of the people I support also have mental health needs. So I think I have a little bit more of a duty to actually speak about it more than I do. So this is me addressing that. Now, I have two mental health conditions. I have depression and I have an anxiety disorder. Now, people often talk about depression in quite a rigid, strict way, that it begins with some low mood and then there's a long continuum, and at the end of which people will feel suicidal. And it's usually caused by a traumatic life event. Now, sometimes that's true, but sometimes people get depressed for all sorts of reasons, sometimes for no reason at all. Sometimes they can become a little depressed and then quite quickly feel like self-harming or feeling suicidal. Sometimes, like me, they get depressed for no apparent reason and they never feel suicidal. I'm really, really fortunate. I've never felt suicidal. But that's not to say that my depression hasn't been difficult and debilitating, because it has. Now, people also often think about depression as being characterised by someone being really sad and crying all the time. Now, I rarely cry. I rarely cry when I'm well, and probably cry even less when I'm depressed. If anything, when I'm depressed, I feel quite emotionally flat, and maybe a little irritable at times, which isn't great for people around me. But I do feel emotionally flat a lot when I'm depressed. I don't have great periods of dark times when I'm feeling despair. I feel huge despondency. I feel very negative, and I feel like there's not a lot of point in anything. But fortunately, as of yet, that's not led me to think about harming myself. Now, as I said, there isn't one big cause of why I'm depressed. And again, people can sometimes be a little confused because they'll see celebrities, famous people, successful people who talk about their depression. And they'll think, well, why are they depressed? What have they got to be depressed? But they could be like me. I've got no reason to be depressed. I'm not the richest, I'm not the most successful, but I have no reason to be depressed other than I get depression. Equally, depression isn't a scoring system. Depression doesn't work out in your mind, I have all of these things to be pleased about and all of these things to be sad about. And if the sad things outnumber the good things, then you'll start to feel depressed. That's not how it works. So even for those people who are really successful, it doesn't maybe take a lot of bad things for them to become depressed. Now, the other thing about depression, and my depression in particular, is I'm often what's called functionally depressed, or I'm a functional depressive. And what that means is I can be carrying on with my life relatively as normal and still be suffering from depression. So, for instance, in the last few months, that's pretty much what my life's been like. I've been going to work, I've been doing my pond, I've been doing all the usual stuff you do in your life, but I've still been depressed. And that, sometimes, again, people find hard to understand because they think, well, no, if you're depressed, you should be off sick, you should be off work. And that's not really how it works. Now, sometimes when my depression gets really bad, then I will be off work and I won't be able to do all the normal things that I do. But for a large part of my life, that's not how my depression affects me. And one of the things I've learned about my depression is I've always kind of thought of myself as being a grumpy, lazy coward. And actually, for most of my adult life, really. But really, what I've come to learn or understand is actually I've been experiencing low mood and possibly depression for a lot of my adult life, which doesn't explain everything. You know, I can be lazy when I'm well, I can be grumpy when I'm well, but it does explain some things. And it certainly does explain those situations and those times when I felt I've been a coward, when in reality what I've been experiencing is an anxiety disorder, which is, as I've said, the second mental health condition I experience. Now again, anxiety is obviously a natural human emotion, a natural feeling that everybody experiences. And sometimes it can be a beneficial thing. It does that kind of fight or flight response that you need. It galvanizes you in situations you're finding difficult. You get an adrenaline spike, and sometimes, as I said, it can really help you. So, for instance, there's times, say, before a job interview, and I quite like job interviews, I'll be honest, but I still can feel very anxious, when it actually helps me focus on what I'm meant to do. And it's that kind of anxiety you can actually push through, and you can overcome it, and you can find coping strategies, and you can push through, and you can succeed or achieve, maybe not get the job, but at least do a good job in the interview, and you can overcome it. Now, when anxiety becomes disordered, you can't overcome it. It's not something you can just fight through. So to compare it to the job interview, where I can feel really anxious, but I can, practice what I'm going to say, I can make some crib notes for myself, I can maybe even do a rehearsal with somebody. I can find times when I can't go to my local shop to get a loaf of bread. I can maybe nearly walk there. I can walk there and then turn around again. I can maybe not even leave the house. And that's not for any reason. That's not because something bad's happened in that shop. It's not because I'm not sure I got enough money to buy bread, or I'm not sure bread will be there, or I think people might laugh at me for some reason. None of those things. No concrete reason. Just a feeling of anxiety that's so great I can't do it. And that I experience quite a lot, and I experience worse when my mood's lower. So when I'm quite depressed, my anxiety will be really high. But talking about all that, I still think I'm quite lucky, and I'm quite lucky for a number of reasons. Firstly, I've never felt suicidal. I've never felt like harming myself. I can be a little self-destructive, by which I mean I won't do things that I know are in my best interest to do. And I know that future me is going to be a little cross with past me for not doing them. But I've never tangibly felt that I want to harm myself or that I don't want to be here. And I feel lucky because it's not something I do. It's not some quality in me that allows me not to feel those things. I'm just lucky. The other reason I'm lucky is my family, the family I live with, my wife and my children. My wife worked in a very similar field to me and now works in another field which enables her to have knowledge and understanding around mental health. But more than that, it's the person she is and her ability to be empathic. That means I get very well supported at home. I'm also really lucky in that I have a really good GP. Now I know it's possible to hear horror stories of GPs that don't get mental health, and don't support people well. But equally, there's lots of stories of where they do, and I'm one of those stories. My GP is excellent. He not only gets mental health and depression and anxiety, he gets how it affects me. And he's worked really well with me as a partner, which is a slightly overused phrase, in developing a way of treating and supporting me when I'm unwell. And again, I'm lucky, and I accept that, and I'm aware of that. I'm also really lucky in that my work is really good. Now, if you know me, you'll know what my work is, and you know who my employer is, and you'll think, well, they should get it really, but they do. My line manager gets it, their line manager gets it, and the organisation as a whole gets it. So over these last few months when I've not been super well, I've been working shorter working weeks. I had a last minute week's annual leave when I just felt I couldn't cope and I needed a break. Now, I didn't have to take that as annual leave. I guess I could have took that as sick leave. But taking sick leave, even though I understand it's not, I still sometimes feel it's a sign of failure, and it's absolutely not. But sometimes it helps me to remain positive to not take sick leave and to take it as annual leave, and that enabled me to have a break, and it worked, and it's got me through this period of not being super well without actually being fully off work and without actually getting that ill as well. So my employer is really supportive, and I think without one of those four things, without a health professional, without an employer, without family or friends, and with a different type of depression, things could be a lot more difficult. Now, looking at what works for me with my depression, it's kind of interesting. Now I have a background that enables me to understand about treatments, whether that's medicinal or other kinds of therapy, but getting the one that works for you is quite difficult. Now, when I'm really, really unwell, or as well unwell as I get, I don't fight depression. There's often this talk about people fighting depression and fighting their mental health. I don't. In essence, superficially, I give into it. But what I'm really doing is I'm reducing demands. So that may be that all I do is, get up, watch telly, watch YouTube, and that's all I do. But if I was to fight it, if I was to increase those demands on myself, if I was trying to push through it, I would fail. And as a result, I'd feel worse. So for a time being, actually what helps me is not to actively fight it, but to live a quite passive life. Now within that, sometimes, so for the last time I felt unwell, I did set myself some targets, and that was just to do housework, just to do the big weekly housework and the daily stuff. And the reason I did that is I didn't want to feel like too much of a burden, and I didn't want to feel like I was failing too much, but it was an achievable aim. And I think that's what's important, whatever stage you are at your recovery from your mental health, you need to set achievable targets. And sometimes that might just be getting up and having a wash. Sometimes it might not be. Sometimes it might be doing what's right for you, and that might be staying in bed. But it's doing what's achievable at the time. Now, anxiety especially can be really helped by you facing those things that you find challenging, that cause you anxiety in small amounts, in a structured way. But sometimes I can't face that. Now, what really happens when I'm particularly unwell and I have to lower all those demands is medicine. Medicine has really helped me get to a point where I can do all that other stuff that's going to help me get better, like go out, like talk to people, like engage with it, like in some way fight what I'm feeling. But medicine's been a kind of stepping stone to that. It's taken the edge off how badly I felt and enabled me to do all those things. Now, medicine has a really bad press. People talk very negatively about antidepressants now, and I know that. I know antidepressants can have quite bad side effects, and they don't work for everybody, and finding the one that does work for you is quite difficult. Finding the dose that works for you is quite difficult. It's quite tricky for me because I have what's called a very narrow therapeutic range, meaning the dose that I can take that works for me without having side effects is very small. It's only sort of between two dosages really. There's not a really big range for me to take. So if a particular medicine isn't working, increasing the dose might not help because I might get more anxious or more irritable. So I have to try a different antidepressant. But, you know, if you have got a good GP or a good medical professional or a good psychiatrist, you can find it. But sometimes it takes time, and that is quite difficult. But what I think is quite important is to be open-minded about what might help you. So having a toolkit of what might help you, having a range of different options, not being too close-minded. Now, I'm not a big fan of mindfulness. I don't really enjoy a lot of it, but there's lots of things you can do that under the umbrella of mindfulness that really do work and that really do help. And there's lots of exercises you can do, especially when you're feeling anxious, that can really help. So although I don't like mindfulness as a concept, and I'm not really on board with a lot of it, there are some of it that I do. Now, there's a really good website that's part of NHS Scotland that has a really good self-help kit around anxiety, and I will post a link both at the end of this video and in the description box below. Now, if you are feeling unwell, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this, in spite of the work I do, in spite of experiencing mental health needs myself, but I do think the most important thing you can do is talk to somebody. Now, that might be a family member, a friend, a professional, a counsellor, the Samaritans, whoever. And again, I will provide a lot of links to, I'm sorry, only UK-based stuff, but a lot of links at the end of this video and in the description box below. But it's important you do talk to somebody. Now, I do know that can be really difficult. And I know the first time that I ever rang my GP to make an appointment because of my mood, I must have tried 10 times before I did it. And it's very easy to look at that first time where you don't even pick up the phone. You're sitting there, you've got the phone number, you've thought about what you're going to say, but you can't even pick up the phone, and seeing that as a failure. And seeing the next time where you do pick it up, but you don't dial, or you half dial, or you dial, but you don't continue the call and you put it down before they answer, as being failures. But actually, it's really good to see them as steps along the way. I wouldn't have got to the point of speaking to my GP if I hadn't have gone through all those steps. So don't see them as failures. And similarly, if you try and talk to a friend or family member and you can't quite do it, again, don't see that as a failure. See that as just one step along the way of getting to the point where you do talk. Now, sometimes people won't necessarily respond in a particularly good way when you do talk to them, and that's not because they don't care or they don't believe you. It's because they don't really understand, and they don't know how to talk to you, and they don't know how to respond. And I would say give them a chance, because they might get there. Now, having said that though, it's not your job to teach them how to support somebody with a mental health need. So if it's not working for you and it's making things worse, then try someone else. But generally people do care, they just don't know how best to respond. And if you are a friend or a family member or a colleague of somebody and they talk to you about their mental health, it's not something to be scared about any more than someone talking to you about them breaking their leg is something to be scared about. I think people often feel the pressure to be therapists, to find all the answers, to find solutions to that person's problem. And that's not what you have to do. You don't have to solve all that person's problems. The best thing you can do is believe them, try to understand them, reassure them, and validate them, and not make them feel like they're wrong or a freak or a failure. And that's the best you can do. And you don't need to come up with a solution. It may be that you talk with your friend or your family member and you do come up with a plan that works for them. You go for a walk every Sunday, or you join a keep fit club, or you do things like that, or you find out that actually when they're starting to talk to me like this, I need to suggest they go and see a doctor. But that will come over time. You don't need to do that in the first half hour of talking to somebody. You just need to be there and listen for them. And that's why Time to Talk is such an important initiative, because we all need to be a little bit more comfortable talking to people. Now, I would say, in spite of my job and in spite of my own condition. I'm not great at it, but you don't need to be great at it. You just need to be okay, and you just need to reassure that person. And if you are somebody with a mental health condition, things can get better. It's very hard to see that they will. I know the very first time that I had a serious period of depression, it was really hard to think that I would ever get back to work. And sometimes I still feel that when I take time off. I think I can't imagine ever getting back to work. I can't imagine ever feeling normal or positive. But you can get there. It can get better. But it needs everybody, really, to be supportive. And that can be in little ways. That, you know, I know a colleague once when I was at work just did a job that I was meant to do, and not because I hadn't done it because I was late or anything. She just did it because she knew it was a job I found difficult, and she just did it. And she didn't make a song or dance of it. She didn't tell me, I'm doing this for you because you're not feeling great. She just did it. And that's immensely supportive, and that's immensely powerful, actually, because it's just making someone's life a little bit easier. So I could waffle on for a long time about not only my own mental health, but mental health in general, but I think I will leave it there. I think the important things to take away is talk to people, whether you're the person who is experiencing mental health condition, or you're a friend or a colleague or a family member. Talking is really important. Not to see mental health as something that needs to be stuck in a box and only spoken about in certain situations and at certain times, but it's something that should be spoken about as openly as physical health or football or, I don't know, ponds, who knows. And it's interesting talking about ponds, and I will drag this back to pond keeping. My pond keeping doesn't negatively affect my mental health. My mental health does negatively affect my pond keeping. But one thing I've thought about a lot lately, and it's going to affect what I do this year with my pond, is that it can feel sometimes that I'm always doing things to my pond rather than enjoying my pond. So not just cleaning the filter, but I'm doing a new project, or I'm digging, or I'm building something, or I'm trying to make something better, or, you know, I think if you keep ponds, you'll understand. And I'm not spending time in the garden just enjoying my pond. And actually, that's what I want to do more this year. I want to do less projects, less trying to get things better, less trying to put things right, and more just enjoying my pond and enjoying the inhabitants and the plants and the garden itself. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Hopefully I won't forget that in a few months when maybe I'm feeling a little bit better. But that's what I'm going to try to do. So yeah, I'm going to finish it there. Thank you if you've made it this far through. Thank you especially if you've made it this far through and you don't normally like this sort of thing. But as I said, if you can take anything away from this, take away that, you know, just talk. And you don't need to be a therapist to talk to somebody who is suffering with their mental health. You just need to be a friend or a family member or a colleague, and you just need to listen. And you need to help in what way you can. And sometimes that's just in telling that person there's nothing wrong with them, they're not a freak, they're just unwell. And it could be any of us at any time. So, on that note, thanks again for watching, and I will see you again on Monday when I'll be talking again about ponds and water and fish and filters and plants and gardens and all that stuff. See you next time.